Welcome, everyone, to another week of Real Talk Food Safety with Jill and Tia.
Yes, welcome, welcome, welcome. We're so excited for you to be here, and we are super excited about our topic.
Of course. Yeah, something that we don't really hear people talking a lot about is leadership presence.
And it's so important, right? We talk a lot about leadership here, right? Welcome to our space. That's what we talk about. And so this whole idea around leadership presence, right, comes up for us, but we haven't really talked about it with you all that much, or even like in spaces we've been in, talking about leadership presence. What is it? How do you get it, right?
hmm Yeah, and I would even love, like, if as you're here, like, drop whether you're live or whether you're on replay. When you hear leadership presence, what do you think of? Like,
Yes.
what are a couple words that describe what you think of with leadership presence?
I'm
hmm
curious with you, Jill. What do you think about when you hear the term leadership presence?
Well, I like the term leadership presence because I think the one that I've most commonly heard, the most common term is executive presence.
Yes.
And when I hear that, my first thought is, ooh, that's not for me.
Ooh, okay.
Because
You're like, no.
of what it conjures up for an image. Like it's this very like rigid appearance, talk, whatever it is about how
Buttoned up
people show
suit.
up. Yes. And so executive presence to me seems extremely like, I don't know, sandpaper-ish. But when I hear leadership presence, I think, oh, that feels much more welcoming and open.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like leadership presence, it's really supposed to embody this whole piece of a leader, right? And when I talk about being a leader, it's really it's these pieces of being authentic, right? And showing up as yourself. And the fact that you've done the work, right, to be more self-aware and to focus on people and all of those things that we think about with leadership presence kind of bring that out to me. And I think to your point, like this being this authentic self, right? I feel like executive presence is all like, okay, this is the formula you need to step into,
Mhm.
regardless of your leadership style, regardless of, who you are as a person. Versus leadership presence is how do I step into being the leader I'm meant to be?
Yeah. And I love that because one of the things when you talk about the executive style about how it's like this formula, like it's a formula of what you have to be.
Yeah, yeah.
Somebody had described leadership presence as it's the difference between looking like you're a leader versus doing the job of a leader.
Yes, yes.
So it's less about the look of the leader versus I'm doing it, but there is this intersection between them.
Yes, absolutely. It makes me think of like the check box, right? Which is where we don't like to play to the actual applied, right? Like,
Mhm.
how are you actually being a leader in your organization versus, oh, you look around, it's like, wow, everyone looks like leaders. But once you dive deep, it's like no one's leading. Like, no one's leading, no one's being an example, no one's doing these things,
Yeah.
right? But everyone dressed the part.
I'm
Look
like,
the
I'm
part.
laughing because it's so funny how we find us and Catalyst in this spot, right?
Right.
When we talk about food safety culture, that's like turned into the survey checklist. Do we meet the regulations? We're like, that's not where we play. It's about like, how do we show up and take care of people?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the same thing we're talking about here today. It's not just like, do I look like a leader? It's, am I being a leader? Am I being
Yes.
open and like actually doing the work and creating the habits and taking care of people?
Yes. It's that you've done the work, right? Like you've done
Mhm.
the work behind leadership versus just like, okay, I put on a suit today, right? Or I brushed my hair, or I, put on some makeup or make sure I have my earrings in, like whatever it is around executive presence, right? That we think about, it doesn't actually mean that you're a leader.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't just
Mhm.
because you can give a presentation, right, have all the right words, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are that leader.
No. And it's funny how there's this preconceived idea. And I think it's shifting
I think so
as
too.
we go, but for a long time I think there was this this kind of image that would conjure up, which is why, I talked about it feeling like sandpaper, that when you talk about executive presence or even leadership presence, that we see leaders as this certain something. How often in movies or books or TV shows or, all these places around us where we've been given messages about what a leader should or shouldn't look like.
Yes, yes. And we're going to dive into this a little bit more in the show, but that's what with executive presence, it makes me think of a look versus leadership present make me think about what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
Like how you show up.
And I'm so glad we're kind of like this new term helps us kind of bust through some of those old stereotypes, because even back, we like to have some stats, even back like in the early 70s, there was a social scientist, Virginia Sheen, who showed that their male and female managers perceived leadership attributes that were held by men more than women. Like we all thought that some leadership attributes were things that we saw more in males and these masculine attributes versus women. And so I love that we are starting to see that there are characteristics that are like non-gendered, but that also welcoming like more of who we are and showing up.
Yeah, yeah. It's allowing us to exactly be who we are and bring our own gifts right to the table. Because we know, I mean, men, you all, as you're listening, right? You have a lot of gifts and we need your gifts at the table. Each one of you, I'm looking at you, we need your gifts. Women, we also need your gifts. We also need what you bring to the table. Depending on how you identify, you might man or woman or they or them, we need you, right? Like we need you here at the table, regardless of those things. And if we're only looking at those characteristics from a male perspective, and only if you identify as a male, right? Like we're missing out on all these people, right? All of these people that have these gifts that we need at the table, because who are we serving? We're serving all of those people, right? Yeah. All of those people exist within our facilities, within our company culture, right? Like we're all a part of this culture. So if we only have a little bit of those attributes as a part of what it means to be a leader, then we're missing, right? Like we're missing like all of it.
Well, and to kind of add on that, leadership presence is a leadership skill. We may be born with some natural tendencies, but in general, we're not like we wake up and we're like, oh my gosh, today I'm going to be a leader. So this is something that we can hone. And hopefully the goal is that we do it in a way that's authentic to you, that we all take on that style. So
yeah, I think that's important because, I've said it, if you know me, I know I've said it on Real Talk. But like, I consider myself someone that have these natural tendencies to be a leader, right? Some of that stuff just comes easily to me. However, if you actually start to hone it, right? If you actually start to focus on, okay, what attributes that I have actually makes it easy to be a leader, right? And how do I take a look at that, right? Dissect it, understand what's easy, what's not, right? And okay, what do I bring? What do I want to bring? How do I want to show up? Like doing that deep dive of honing is so valuable. And what you find is that people that were great at leadership early on in their career, they start to, once they run into like hard situations, right? And in my case, I'm great at building relationships, so I lean on that. But there comes a time where, oh, I'm not really building a relationship I thought I could build with this person. I'm not really connecting with this person. And then now you've hit a bump. And if you don't have the actual skills, right, to make it through a situation like that, you find yourself doubting yourself, losing confidence, thinking, oh, maybe I'm not the type of leader that I should be. Maybe I shouldn't be a leader. All those things start coming really to yourself because you haven't really done the work of honing those leadership skills.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue, because if you're just joining us and you are wondering, who are Jill and Tia? We are Catalyst.
Yeah.
And our whole mission is to empower people in food safety and quality to have better outcomes. That's in business, that's in life.
Mm-hmm.
And we do that by having coaching based programs that are practical, relatable, and progressive. So that's what we talk about. And that's how we're talking about leadership presence today. So thank you for
Absolutely.
being here with us.
Yes, yes, we are happy to be here. If you say hello in the comments, we will see it. And then we do have replays on our blog, so visit our website to check them out and learn more about us.
Yeah. And today, that's why we're going to talk about leadership presence.
Yes.
And I haven't found a book specifically leadership presence, but there are definitely resources out there to help. But really, it's about, what is it that, how are you proactive in showing who you are and what you stand for and how you'd like to be perceived versus just taking what other people think?
Yeah.
Because what you have, like Tia said, have all these gifts as a human, as a leader. And so that's really where we want to focus today.
Yeah, yeah, because that's big. Being able to understand your brand and who you are, right? From your own perspective, not everyone else's, is so important.
Hmm. And we know there's first impressions are big.
Yeah.
And hopefully, through this, what we're going to learn is some of these things may be important to us. Maybe they're not as important to us. This is kind of the buffet line. Which
Mm-hmm.
things are important to you, and take the parts that fit, and the ones that don't, leave them for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think we've moved away from some of the old stereotypes of like, well, I have to confidently walk in the room and have a firm handshake and, make really solid eye contact. Those may be important,
Yeah.
but what's important for you?
Right.
And really, it's about making sure that that can come through versus some of the other things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think that's a really great lead in to the conversation because a lot of us feel like we have to be everything, right,
Mm-hmm.
to everyone, and that is just not true. We're here to tell you that is not true. You want to stand in your space and stand in who you are, because that actually lets you know, like, who your people are, right? Like, it's funny, we were just talking about someone that was in our boot camp, and this person was saying how, like, our boot camp is so different than the other leadership course he's in because we're talking about things that are relatable and practical, right? So he's able to take it and do something with it. And he used the term like, you're my people.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that's what you really want to find. And if you look at leaders, right, they can't necessarily lead in every single scenario at every single company, right? That's just not the way it works. But you really just need to understand who you are and what type of leader you want to be so that you can find your people, right?
Yeah, it's not a one size fits all. And I know I'll go back to my sandpaper example, executive presence. One of the things that kind of rubbed me wrong in that was this initial perception that I'm supposed to change who I am to fit in over here.
Yeah.
And what I really want people to think about with leadership presence is it's more about knowing our audience so that we can be sure of who we are and honoring that, but then showing up in a way to be able to have connections with them.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
not about changing who we are because of who we're with or where we are, but really
Yeah.
about understanding how do we show up in a way to help serve people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really big difference that I think about when it comes to executive presence versus leadership presence.
Mm-hmm.
Like changing myself versus stepping into who I am, learning about myself, right, and stepping into who I am.
Mm-hmm. So today, right, we want to talk all about some different characteristics around leadership presence
Mm-hmm.
so that you can explore to either develop, improve, or maybe just think about how some of these fit for where you're at or where you want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's jump in. Number one, we talked a little bit about already, right? But we're going to dive a little bit deeper.
Mm-hmm.
Number one is to know what you stand for. Right? Know what you stand for. Have a vision of what you want to accomplish and then communicate it well.
Yes, because leaders have people follow them.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole point of being a leader is like, I have something that I have a dream and I want other people to buy into that together. So if we aren't sure what we stand for, that's a good place to start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because no one can follow you if you don't have a vision yourself. right? Like where are we going? Right?
Mhm.
Like that's what people ask, where are we going? Where are we headed to? And if you're like, I don't know, I'm just kind of walking, then people are gonna be like, well, I think I'm gonna walk over here instead, or I'm gonna try to figure out, right, like where I want to go, right? But as a leader, it's really understanding like, yeah, what is your dream? What is your vision? What are we walking towards? In that whole piece of like communicating it well, right? Being
Mhm.
clear and concise on like, this is where we're going. And this
Mhm.
is why we talk about this a little bit too, on like, this is why you should care about where we're going. And this is why you should be on board with it.
Yeah, and I think it's so important. One of our modules in boot camp is about influence,
Hmm.
and we talk about why inspiration is the most effective means for influencing because you've created this, like, people want to come with you. You have inspired them.
Yes.
And that's what a leader needs to do. It's not about showing people data. Most leaders aren't like, let me show you the data. No, they are using that maybe as a platform to then inspire people to say, and here's what we can do because of that data or with that data.
Yes. Yes. It should be like, I mean, think about when you hear dream or vision or your vision board, right? Like you
Yeah.
see color or you see these possibilities, right? That make you feel warm and fuzzy. And I mean, it's like it's open, right?
Mhm.
Like you can conquer the world. You can like do what you want to do and what inspires you. Like
Mhm.
that's the type of vision you want each person to understand, right, and champion. But you have to know what you stand for, right? Because
Yes.
people have their own visions and their own ways, right? And so you have to know, not this, because I don't really stand for this, even though it's like that's great. Like, have you been a part of something where it's like all of these things we want to do in the world, like fight hunger, right,
Mm.
and save food, and we want all of these things, right, homelessness, and think of all the things that impact the world. You can't be a leader in all of those areas, even though all of those areas are very important to you, right, or they're very important to the world. But it's hard if you don't understand who you are, right, and what your mission is, right, what your vision is, that you'll start to stretch yourself too thin
Well,
almost. But you're trying to
yeah.
play in all these areas.
And I think then it's hard for people to see, like, where do I fit into that vision?
Yeah, yeah.
So, for an example, when I first took over food safety and quality within my organization across a few plants, like our goal was, how do we come together? That was the mission. So my vision for everybody, I said, every food safety quality manager, our vision, our goal is for you to like sit back in your desk with your feet up and drink coffee. Like, our vision is that things work so well and we have such an engaged team and we have empowered them and we are there as support and
Hmm.
good leaders.
Hmm.
Like, can you buy into this vision? And even though they laughed, they were like, you're kind of onto something.
Right.
Like, you're,
Hmm.
you're kind of onto something. And I want to see where this goes because I think we can create something closer to that than where we are today.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean that's impactful because you were able to show them like, this is my vision for you, right? And then they started to think like, "Ugh, that would be pretty nice,
They
right?"
added their own parts to it.
Right, exactly. It's like maybe I won't have coffee. Maybe I have my hot chocolate, right? Like maybe, like what could that's an amazing world to be in, and to like point out those things. So like you can also do it with. I did it with my team, working on the operations floor, where I was walking by. I'll never forget. I had a team member that was working our case packer, and I walked by, and she's like, "Oh, hmm." I worked second shift at the time, so it's late. Um, and this person yawned, and I'm like, that's what I want for you every single night.
Yes, that
That's
it's
what I want for you every
everything's
single night.
going so well.
Everything's going so well, right? You're not fighting, you're not, sweating, you're not in this place of chaos, right? Like you are able to sit and relax. That's what
Yeah.
I want for you every night.
Yes. And so I think this going back to, and we spent a lot of time on this first element of leadership presence, knowing what you stand for and having a vision,
Yeah.
because it all comes back to you standing in you and being aware of the things that you're contributing, that you're helping create.
Yes. And this really is one of the most important ones.
Mhm.
It's really with mindset, right? It encompasses the whole, I need to first work on myself before I can even lead others.
Yeah, because why would they come along with me if I'm not even aware of what I'm doing?
Right. Exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is really a good one to start with and say, like, what do I even stand for?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Which kind of falls into the next one because you could stand for something, but the next element is really considering how you communicate.
Yes. Yes.
Because I can have the best vision, but if I am unable to communicate that to others or to hear the questions they have around it, to be part of it, I may not be able to like move my leadership presence forward.
Yes, this one is also important because, like you said, it's if you have everything, right, and you feel so great about it, but you don't have anyone to come with you, right, or to champion that vision because you can't be everywhere,
Mhm.
right, all the time. So, as a leader, you really rely on other people to spread that vision.
Mhm.
If you're not able to communicate that well, right, and in a way that each person, each of your champions are able to take it, right, and go out and spread the news of your vision and help inspire other people, then it's really just you and your thoughts, right? You with your mission, right, but no one else to help champion it.
Mhm. Which is really important because we want people to like engage with their full attention when we talk about being in this space together to create this vision and make it realized.
Right. Yeah.
So, for example, right? I mean, we all have things. So, every time for a long time when I would see something come out from Simon Sinek, if you don't know him, you can always check him out. Um, he had created such a vision on how we take care of people that I was like, yes, sign me up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important because he communicated that vision well, whether it was speaking, writing, virtual, like
Mm-hmm.
everything had this consistency about what this vision was and engaging people to be part.
Yes, yes. And I like that example because you mentioned a few different ways, right?
Mhm.
On how you communicate or the pathways of communication. Try different methods. People pick up on things differently,
Yeah.
right? Like some people are visual learners, right? Some people like to listen, some people all the above, right? Some people like to write. Make sure you offer your vision in many different formats so
Mhm.
people can pick it up with the way that they learn.
Yes. But I think also being open
Yes,
to listening.
yes,
Once
yes.
again, I may have the greatest roadmap, but if I just talk at people without listening and saying, how does this feel for you? Where else do you see we can add to this? Where do we need to shift?
Yes.
As leaders, part of our presence is the ability to stop.
Mm,
It's
mhm.
to listen. It's to invite others to the conversation to make the vision part of what they do as well and where they want to go.
Yes, absolutely. Leaders, the thing that they do most is listen.
Mhm.
So if you find yourself always the one talking, right, then again something's missing because as
Mhm.
a leader it's important for you to listen so that you can understand, right, the values of others, their beliefs, how do you inspire them, all the things that we really talk about in boot camp because that's what type of leaders we're trying to help empower, are leaders that listen and serve their teams and
Yeah.
other people.
Mhm. And it's hard to create vision and it's hard to communicate things if you don't have credibility.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
credibility is another characteristic and it is key.
It really is. Making sure that you have the expertise in your role, right?
Yes.
Making sure that you are known and credible, right, to your group. And that might be your local group, but it also might mean that you need to be credible outside of your group.
Mhm.
Let me say most of the time it means you need to be credible outside of your group, right? Like you can't be head down working with just where you are. People have to be able to see that credibility.
Yes. And I think, especially when we work in this space of food safety and quality, right? If we don't have some of those foundational pieces to know these technical skills, how does that how do people view that and perceive that when you ask them to come along with you?
Mm, yes. Yes. I'm just like, take a moment to even think about, someone in your mind where you're like, I don't know if they're that credible, right? Or they've had quite a bit of missteps, right? Where you're like, oh, they need to build their credibility back up. It's hard to follow people, right, if they don't have that credibility.
Hmm. And I think we have people in general who ask all the time about how do I build credibility early in my career?
Yes.
Well, that's where it starts. It's
Hmm.
one decision at a time, it's one conversation at a time. It's sharing your intellectual horsepower, but also being open to the places that you don't know.
Mm. Hmm. Oh, that's a big one right there. Being able to say, I don't know, let me go find out.
Hmm.
Like, just that shows your credibility, because people know you're not going to answer a question if you don't know the answer.
Hmm. But also stand your ground when you're like, yep, I know this. Like, this
Yes.
is something I have experienced, I've studied, whatever it is.
Hmm.
That's part of how you build your credibility is too, kind of standing in your vision of this is what I know.
Yes. Yes. And sharing your perspective. And most of the time, if you're in the room, it's because you have something valuable, right? You
Mm-hmm.
have something valuable that the team needs. Share that, right? Like, stand in that. That's a part of building your credibility.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I will also say that, being in food safety and quality, being in the technical field, is that a lot of times people get stuck around credibility, only thinking about technical skills.
Mm,
And we're here talking about leadership presence. So it's important to note that leadership presence also take into account leadership credibility.
yes. This goes back to the question that we always like to ask. How many degrees or certificates do you have for technical skills? Right? List them all off.
Right.
SQF, HACCP, PCQI, BRC, whatever. All of those, just alphabet soup them out.
Right.
Now, how many degrees or certificates do you have for leadership?
Mm-hmm.
We have yet to find someone who even comes close or even has one or two that might be around leadership as we're trying to influence and impact this entire function area discipline
Yeah.
within our organization.
Yeah.
So when we say we get stuck here in our technical skills, Tia, I love that you bring that up because often we get stuck and we stay there. And we
Yes.
operate on, we kind of leverage our whole like, well, I'm a good person, I'm organized, I know my,
Right. Yeah.
that is all amazing. Still be doing those things.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
to get to that next place that you keep thinking, like, wouldn't it be nice if we were here? Or I wish we could do this instead. Leadership presence, leadership.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And put work into that, right? Like, you have
Mhm.
to also build that credibility side of things.
Yes. Didn't you say that the other day? Like you have to work for it.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And I don't know why it's been like in my mind too. And maybe it's just the work we've been doing, right, in Catalyst. But I feel like everyone, and this also makes me think of executive presence versus leadership presence. I feel like with executive presence, people just think like that checkbox, like I just need to buy this suit, right? Or I just need to speak this way, right? I just need to do that type thing. Versus like, no, you have to actually put in the work to be in a leader,
Mhm.
right? You have to put in the work to build that credibility. It's not something that happens overnight.
Mhm. Yes, which kind of goes into the next one of being of leadership presence, which is learn to network and be savvy.
Yes. Yes. Networking has been on our mind. Last week we were on food safety chat with Brian, and we talked about networking
Mhm.
and the importance of networking. And to be a leader, one thing that's important about networking is that you're able to share that message with others, right? You're building your circle of influence, which is exactly what leaders need, right,
Mhm.
in order to lead.
Yeah, and I think go check out Brian's show from Friday because we talked about some of the downfalls about networking. Because sometimes when we even say that word, it's almost like sandpaper to people.
Right. Yes.
For some reason, it brings up this negative like connotation that networking is all about like I need to get things from people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think sometimes it can feel frustrating, especially within our organizations, when we feel also that it might be like playing politics.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And one thing that I talked about on Brian's show is that for me, instead of saying networking, I like to say building relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can even say connecting with people. Right? Like that's
Yeah.
really what it's about. It's about that connection with other people and building relationships with one another. Versus, and then it kind of changed your mindset from the, okay, I need to go and get something from people, or even some people are like, oh, I have to go and give something. I don't know what to give, right? Like, I don't know what they want from me. I don't know what, but when you really think about, okay, I'm going to this event, right? Or I'm joining, Real Talk Food Safety, right? And I'm going to message in the comments because I want to connect with others, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want to build relationships with others. That's just a different, it at least shifts my mindset a little bit.
Yeah, and I really loved how one of our sources talked about this. Sometimes this networking or playing politics is really about navigating human dynamics. They
Mm-hmm.
even went further and said, companies are composed of complex relationships, and there will always be diversity of opinions and competing agendas.
Mm.
You've got to learn how to navigate through those human dynamics.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
what part of leadership presence does. It's learning about people and what they value and what they believe, and building relationships to have those conversations, to be able to navigate that complexity. So you
Mm-hmm.
can have, right? You can meet goals and have, shared outcomes together.
Mm-hmm. And I truly do believe that statement. Like, you've got to learn to navigate that
Hmm.
as a leader, right? And I think that's another difference between like what I think about with executive presence and leadership presence. As a leader, like, you have to learn how to navigate the different personalities, the difference of opinions, right? The competing priorities. You have to learn to navigate that because that's not going away. Nor do
Hmm.
you want, you really don't want that to go away, right? Because then you
No,
have a culture of all the same people.
yeah,
Um,
we need that.
right. We need that. We need that. As a leader, you have to navigate that. I think as we even talk about like being savvy, I looked up the definition of savvy because like we hear this term, business savviness,
Hmm.
right? Like,
Oh
what
yeah,
exactly does
true.
that even mean? And I think it falls into a place of learning to navigate, human dynamics. But the part of the definition is the ability to make good judgments,
Hmm.
right? And one thing that I thought was interesting about that definition is that, okay, and one of the definitions that said the ability to have common sense and make good judgment. But I think that all comes down to understanding human dynamics, right?
Hmm.
Understanding those human dynamics, what the values of each person on your team is, what are their beliefs, how do they like to operate, understanding that piece so that you can make good judgments.
Yeah, and I think to go with that, it doesn't mean that as you're networking, you're making BFFs with everyone as you go. What it means is we're understanding people and we're honoring what they believe in and what they value, and respecting that and having conversations versus being like, you can't be in my network. Like, we don't think the same.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
welcome that, and think about like how that actually strengthens what you're doing. And that's part of networking, to say, I'm not just going to cut this person out or off because I disagreed with them that one time. It's like,
Right.
wow, they really offered up something that I hadn't thought about. And while they're maybe not my favorite person to go have an hour lunch with, you know what, they're an important part to have in this network and navigate.
Mm-hmm. It's an important connection, right, to
Hmm.
have
It
because
is.
each of us are valuable, right?
Hmm.
And carry that value.
Which maybe plays into the next characteristic, because sometimes we're going to, as leaders, we need to learn how to bring ease to situations, especially if we're operating under stress, which in our field we all probably experience, maybe once in a while.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes, absolutely. And many times this is what separates, um, you know, moderately good leaders from the great leaders, right? The
Mhm.
ones that can operate under stress and not appear overwhelmed and confused or creating their own chaos, even.
Yeah, I think, when we talk about, like, no one wants to see a leader completely overwhelmed,
Right.
because they're the one we're following. And if they're like, oh my gosh, the sky is falling, then it really takes away our sense of security and we kick into more survival mode.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
how can we remain calm and truthful, even maybe if we don't have information? How do we help people go, hey, we don't have, yeah, we don't have all everything we need, but we're going to be in this together.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? When I think about this, I think about my daughter, Tiana, right? And traveling. So we travel quite a bit with Tiana, and I'm actually in these traveling groups, like top traveling and toddlers, like those type of things. And I like watch people, you know, the questions that they have and the issues that they're having, right? And they're trying to get advice and that type of thing. But one like common thread, or common piece of advice, I would say, and one thing that has worked well for us is that if you are stressed out and overwhelmed and feel like you're in chaos and you are showing those emotions or have those emotions, then your toddler feels that. So they also start to feel stressed.
Yes.
And, you know, they also start to feel like the sky is falling, which is not what we want them to do, right? Like, we definitely don't want them to do that. And so, this whole effort, which it takes effort, right? To go with the flow, to be calm, right? To be solutions oriented, all of those things, like, this is great practice for being a leader because but the whole key is that you don't want them to be stressed.
Yes. Yes. Once again, I had so many early learnings when I like early in my career, right? Lots of things that are very memorable for me. But one was probably midpoint, yeah, not mid, early mid, like leading in the plants when all of a sudden, right, big issue came up. We've all
Mm,
had those moments where you're like, this is like the fire alarm. We all have to be together.
right.
And my boss at the time was like, well, Jill, I don't know food safety. We were tucked under, another function in the organization. They're like, we need you to lead this. And I'm like, dang. Okay. So, right. Everybody on the phone. This is back in the conference call days. And my goal was just to lead people through and follow our procedure and ask the right questions. Inside, I was like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Yep. Yeah. Thinking about what was going on. But what I loved is somebody was like, how'd you stay so calm in that? Like you just like everybody else could feel like, whew, take a breath.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize I was doing that. That's probably from years of doing yoga and some other things that it kicked in to be able to help me with that.
Mhm.
But I think, Tia, like you said, even with Tiana, right?
Yeah.
The things that our emotions, they're energy in motion. So people feel those.
Right.
And as
Yes.
a leader, people will look to us for that. And calm may look different in different situations.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's not, once again, one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah.
But what does that look like when it's situation, people, environment dependent?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I love your example because many of us, including myself, have been there, right? Where you need to
Yeah.
step in. And if you have not yet, it's coming. So
Yes.
I'm curious,
It's not
Jill,
if, it's when.
it's when, exactly. So I'm curious, when you felt that way, do you have any like tricks? You kind of brought up yoga, but is there any like tricks you do or something you do to like keep that calm exterior, right? And exude,
Mhm.
calmness?
It really is breath.
Mm,
Like I
mhm.
really try to think, breathe in, just take a breath.
Yeah.
Because when I do that, right, this all goes back to when we have fear come up, we naturally have our fight, flight, or freeze mechanism come into
Yeah.
play. When that happens, right, all essential survival things kick in. And so our ability to think and navigate perhaps complex situations like minimizes because that's just seen as extra. If I'm not running, I don't need to be thinking.
Yeah.
And so we have to be able to somehow find a way to help ourselves, like kick into, I don't need fight, flight, or freeze. And that for me, that's breathing. That's
Mm.
letting my body like flow those emotions through so that I can stay calm and hopefully think and have a clearer head.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's great. It's something that centers you. It centers people, right?
It
We can try
does.
breathing.
But I think, and we all have different stages and seasons of our life where that's easier than others. We're not going to, right? We all know there's times where I'm sure I was like a chaotic mess.
Right.
Um, but some of those things that factor into it, right, are the things that we need for even our self care. Like if I'm not eating, sleeping, having support, or making time during my day, my ability to show up and be calm in a stressful situation is going to be less. This I
Mm.
know for sure.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point too, because a lot of times it's that practice right before the event. If
Mhm.
you're not, or that preparation before the event, if you're not in your your good habits, or not doing your rituals, or not having positive self-talk, all of those things are prepping you for when an event is coming. It's like training for running. Like my husband right now is planning on running a 10K, and a piece of that he has built in, right, training, which is funny. If he's hearing this, then he had to travel for work last week, so he kind of got off a little bit. He's probably thinking, yeah, I need to get back on.
Okay.
But it's one of those things that if the day of, if he's like, I'm gonna run it, but I haven't done any running before, his body is gonna react in a very different way than
Mhm.
if he's been running leading up to the event. And it's prepping for that event, right? It's exercising your mind. It's one of the things, like if you hadn't been practicing breathing, right? Breathing techniques, you probably wouldn't be prepared.
No, and we often don't think about how that will play into our leadership presence. But it's really important to build some of that self-awareness so that you can sense what others are feeling. You can respond versus react, because as leaders, that's what people look to us to be able to
Mhm.
help navigate those
Absolutely.
choppy waters. So,
Absolutely. I think one thing also important to note, like as you're operating under stress and focus on bringing the ease, it is okay to not know an answer
yeah.
in the chaos. And a lot of people are like, "Oh no, I have to know all the answers, right? Like I have to know all the answers. They're calling on me. They want me to lead them through." Many, many times you can say, "Oh, that's such a good question. I don't have the answer for that right now. Let me look that up for you."
Yeah,
Let
that goes back to the credibility, leadership presence and
Mhm.
credibility. That could be a whole nother show on some
Yeah.
like navigating incidents. And so,
Ooh, yeah, that would be a good one. That would be a good one. We can all relate to that.
yes. Well, and part of this then goes into the next characteristics, which is how do you exhibit confidence and humility?
Yeah.
Because if I don't know and I'm so unsure, like saying I'm not sure I'm going to get back to you is showing confidence. To be like, I don't know, that's not helping anybody feel confident in my leadership.
Right, right. If you're like, I don't know when the world's gonna fall,
Right.
then it's like everyone else is going to, they're gonna feel that, right? Versus like, I'm confident in what I do know, and I'm confident in what I do not know, and what I need to
Yeah.
go and look for.
And what I love about this one, and thinking about exhibiting confidence and humility, it's those two things existing together so that it keeps you out of cocky.
Yes.
Because we've all, I don't know about you, but I've seen a leader or two who I'm like, cocky. And that's a hard line for me. That's a hard line, because then I'm not sure if I don't know where I fit where they fit with me on trust. And like, do I really want to follow someone who feels like, to me, cocky is more in it for them than for all of us?
Yes, yes,
And when we talk
exactly.
about confidence and humility, this is the space where it's people know that we're thinking about them and serving people, even if part of what we're working on is the purpose and productivity side.
Yes, yes. It's not all about you as a leader,
Yeah.
right? Like I think that's the difference in like it also comes back to understanding like, what do I know? What do I not know? Right?
Mhm.
How can I contribute? How can other people contribute?
Yeah.
Versus I'm going to know it all. I'm going to contribute everything. I'm going to do everything. And hey, I'm the leader, so everyone should do what I'm doing, right?
Mhm.
Everyone should listen to me. Everyone should, because I have all the answers. And no one else has anything else to contribute because I know it all. Like to me, like that's cockiness, right?
Cocky.
Right.
Over here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Versus hey, I'm confident in what I know, you're confident in what you know, together, right? That's how we're going to find our solution.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too. It's, I like the way, like, as we were preparing for this, like, I like the statement of, like, as a leader, you believe that you have something to contribute and you believe that other people do too.
Yeah.
Like, I
That
feel like that is like, yes, yes, that's what you want a leader to be, right? That they can contribute and they also feel like each member of their team also has something to contribute.
Yeah, I think that's why it's so powerful to think about leadership presence with this element of how do I display confident? How do I display confidence and humility? And once again, no one size fits all.
Mhm.
These look different in different situations.
Right, exactly. Focusing on serving people,
Yeah.
right, is the big thing. If you are taking away one thing from today, right, it's all about, if you are looking at developing your leadership presence, think about how can you focus more on serving people.
Hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
So interesting segue then to our last characteristic of leadership presence, but everybody, we kind of touched on it at the beginning. It's this appearance part.
Yeah.
Because like I said, in my head I create this picture of what a leader is supposed to be, and sometimes I'm like, "Oh geez, that doesn't feel authentic."
Yeah, yeah. And like when you I think it's just the way we've been taught around executive presence. It has been focused on appearance,
Mhm.
right? It's been focusing on those things, right, that we've all heard on what a leader should look like.
Yes, and this woman, Sylvia Ann Hewitt, who wrote the book on executive presence. So a little bit different, but some of the things that people said about appearance was that you've got to look as though you've tried and you've pulled yourself together.
Whatever pull yourself together means, right?
Means, let's see, good grooming is not just about making a polished first impression. It's about signaling to your competitors and yourself that you're in control, total control.
Wow, that's interesting. Good grooming means that you're in total control.
Right, totally. Like, are my eyebrows okay? I mean, I don't
Right.
know.
I know. I'm
Um,
just thinking about like those times I looked like I had it all together, but yeah,
but
right.
it's interesting how like some people thought like that conjures up the difference between someone I think is a leader or not.
Mm-hmm.
And granted, that's maybe once again, one size doesn't fit all. Here I'm judging. One size doesn't fit all.
That's true. That's true. That's
Um,
true. But it's worth bringing up in the sense of like, think about, again, this is like the checklist, right, of things to do versus actually doing it. Those people that's like, wow, like maybe they do look like a leader. And then you sit down and you talk with them and you're like, no, I'm not following that person. Right. Like leadership presence, like incorporates the whole piece of like, wow, like that's an inspiring person and I want to follow them.
yeah.
I want to champion their vision.
And I think it also like this shows like how there's these ends of the spectrum on how people view appearance related to what they think about leadership and what leadership presence is.
Right. Right. Exactly. Which is interesting. And so, we have to bring up appearance because I think that's a huge piece of it.
Mhm.
But we know that even with leadership presence, right? And appearance is important, but it's not everything.
Right. I mean, we keep going back to, right? Like the know your audience. Like, I don't want to walk into a place where everybody does have the suits on. And like, I think you said earlier, like, I don't want to show up in my shorts.
Right. Right. At a black tie event, right? You don't want
Yes.
that. Right. Or maybe you do, just know who you are, right?
Yes. And stand in that, right?
Right. Yes. Yes. That's
Yes.
why number one was so important, to know yourself, know what you stand for. Because as you think about appearance, right, in your audience, knowing your audience, that means knowing your culture, right, your company culture or the party dress code,
Mhm.
whatever it happens to be, knowing that, and then making the decision, what type of leader do you want to express,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
What type of leader do you want to show?
Hmm. And I think it's also good to think about kind of right. We always talk about the other side too. Does appearance cause people to exclude other people from being viewed as leaders?
Mm. Well, being a black female, right, and a black woman in corporate America, I can 100% answer that question as yes, right? Like we use, and sometimes it's malicious, sometimes it's not, right? It's all around, this. We kind of talked about it earlier, just how we started on, are these characteristics that we've kind of come up with on what a leader looks like, has
Yes.
that excluded people, right?
Mhm.
Because they don't, quote unquote, look like what we have described.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because I think, well, I'll say, right, I certainly have made conclusions about perhaps first impressions on
Mhm.
where I think somebody maybe had a status in an organization
Yeah.
or what they did. It's not that something I'm proud of, but we've been trained. So we have all been trained to have these thoughts about things. But how do we, one, when we're with people, remind ourselves that like we need to embrace the diversity around us
Yeah.
and not jump to those types of conclusions, but also then like how do we show up to once again be authentic for us,
Yeah.
even if it means people are like, oh, I get to see a new type of leader today.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah. And I think also sharing, right? Like the moments where, oh man, I had a judgment, right? Or I had a preconceived notion on who a leader might look like at this organization. And now I've been presented with another option. Being able to say, oh, yes, that's exactly the way a leader should is also looks, right? And sharing that as examples to other people to say, like, I've seen a leader like this. I've seen a leader like this. I've seen a leader like this. All are right, right?
Yes.
All are, like we said, one size does not fit all. Each of those persons are able to lead in a way that the other person could not.
Yeah, and it goes back to all of those other characteristics, right? When people really lead with their vision, when people are confident, when people have credibility, all of these other parts are the things that are where the rubber meets the road.
Absolutely, absolutely. But we know that this piece of appearance is a part of it, right? Like comes up. And I think one of the reasons it's important for us to talk about is that as we grow as leaders, right, it's important for us to know that this exists and
Mhm.
then help be a part of stamping those things out when it comes to leadership. And I think that's a part of a leader in the type of cultures we're trying to build, not just within food safety, but within culture altogether, right? In overall culture, is that we
Mhm.
want everyone to feel accepted, right? We
Mm.
want everyone to be able to bring their ideas to the table and be able to contribute, right? Like as a leader, we feel like others have value, right? And they too have something to contribute. If you are excluding people based off of, your own discomfort or
Mhm.
what you feel like a leader looks like, then you're not getting all the voices to the table, right? You're
Yeah.
not getting all the right voices to the table.
No. And and creating a safe place for people to bring their voices, views, perspectives is important. So
Yeah,
if we have this preconceived notion or we do this conform, like we don't want people we don't want leaders to have to minimize their differences and conform just because it makes us feel more comfortable.
right.
Like we want them to show up as their authentic self, to be able to share their ideas and help us all be better together.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mhm.
And we know that this is a problem, particularly for people of color, right?
Mhm.
Like one of the statistics we have that was done as a national survey in 2012 is that 41% of professionals of color said that they had felt the need to compromise their authenticity in order to conform to executive presence standards at their company.
Wow. The part that catches me on that is I have to compromise my authenticity.
Yes. Yes.
That
Like,
leads me to think that we have, even in 2012, that's still what has come up.
right.
And so, how can we be mindful and aware of really creating this safe place for people to not have to feel like they have to compromise who they are to be able to be here with us?
Right, exactly. And I think that it's that shift to leadership presence, right?
Mhm.
Really understanding that as a leader, we all have these pieces to bring,
Mhm.
right? And in order for you to be a great leader, you have to be authentic.
You do,
So,
and you have to set the stage for everyone too, to be
exactly.
welcoming and to bring that forth, and that's part
Mhm.
of your leadership presence as well.
Hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's big thinking about like as a leader, I need to be able to stand in my space. And if there are people, within your team or within your organization, right, that you're responsible for, if they feel like that they cannot be their authentic self, can you imagine like even thinking about productivity, right? Can you imagine how productivity is impacted, right? How engagement is impacted because someone can't show up as their authentic self.
Yeah. That's, and the thing is, it starts early because Tia, you found some really good information about the Crown Act
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
some research on girls and just how this perception of what we think people should be, people feel and they can name it
Yes.
early.
Yes, yes. So if you don't know what the Crown Act the Crown Act is actually legislation that is looking to be put into place to help discrimination based on hair texture and hairstyles.
Mhm.
And so it stands for it's actually an acronym, and it stands for Create a Respectful and Open Workplace for Natural Hair. And so a big thing that they did research around it, and they found that in particular Black girls as young as 5 years old experience hair discrimination.
Five.
5 years old.
5 years
By
old.
age 12, 86% of Black teenagers started experiencing discrimination based on their hair at 12. And I must say, at 12, I don't even know if I was doing my own hair, right? Like, but you've already experienced discrimination based on hair.
Yeah, and some judgments about something about hair. And we talk about appearance. Once again, all this goes back to leadership presence and what
Mm-hmm.
people are hearing and like internalizing at early ages.
Right. And then that continues on right into your professional work. 80% of Black women are more likely to change their hair from its natural state to fit in at their place of work. I have to change my full appearance, right, to just be able to fit in. This has nothing to do with my work, my credibility, any of those pieces. It's just the whole piece that I feel like just to be able to fit in, I have to change my hair,
How I look.
how I look.
Even though it doesn't make you a better leader or make you more credible or help you build more, actually, it probably erodes confidence when you're like, I have to, once again, compromise my authenticity to
Yes.
conform.
Yes, yes. And that's why it's so important for us to understand as leaders. And when we talk about leadership presence, it's all about being your true self. And as a leader, accepting others' true selves.
Absolutely. And I think those things that we don't always fully realize the impact to really create some awareness around that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that kind of goes into this part, and see if I'm going too fast, but like, how do you even know what your leadership presence is? So
Yeah,
how do
that's
we
a good
know
point.
if we've like made some like a misstep that we can correct or shift on what we're doing?
Yes, yes. And that's a great question. I would say ask people around you, right? Like start there. If you have a mentor, ask your mentor, right? But use people around you. One of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten was to use a peer mentor.
Oh, yeah.
And that whole idea around if you're going to give a presentation, ask someone in the room to pay attention to your leadership style, right? Pay attention to how you're presenting. Were you clear, right? Thinking about communication, all of those pieces. And, I did that a few times when I first started, because of course I didn't know anything about a peer mentor, right? At that time, but someone said that and I was like, oh, that's such a great idea. So I asked a few of my peers, hey, I'm going to give, they're coming to the presentation, right? They know what it's about. And I asked them, hey, I want to make sure that the message is clear, concise, or, whatever the things that I told them. Do you mind just keeping an ear out, an eye out, and giving me some feedback afterwards? And so they were, of course, I've never had someone say, nah, I don't want to do that. Right. Like I've always had people say, yes, of course, of course. And then I was able to get that feedback afterwards. That has been really valuable to me.
And this is so important because once again, we have blind spots. We don't know what we don't know. And so if we don't ask people around us to say, hey, what did you sense? Like, how did I show up? What was the takeaway? Like, how do you sense other people responded to me?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Those are really important things to ask. And even if you're like, well, I want to someday lead in this group or this area or this team, like, am I exhibiting what it would take to be in that space?
Yes. Yes.
Those are
Yeah.
all important questions to ask because while we can somewhat sense it from people, right, we might be able to if we're very aware and open to what others are perhaps sending our way or maybe what they're saying. we might be able to see how they're responding to us. But articulating our requests and that for feedback can be so much more powerful.
Absolutely. And asking deeper questions too. Sometimes people give you feedback like, oh, wow, Jill, that presentation was so great. Oh, I'm glad you liked it. What did you enjoy about it? Just asking a little bit more and understanding, right? Because then people will start putting words to what you're doing that you maybe didn't even think about. And that helps build that confidence, right? That helps build that credibility, because even though that person is like talking to you and answering your questions, they're almost like cementing it in their mind about your credibility, right? And so having them think through it, and talk through it, that also builds your credibility.
Yeah, I think that's really one of the key points with feedback is don't just go like, how did it go? But I love that, Tia. It's like, how do you feel I showed up with this, with credibility? How do you feel I showed up with leadership presence? You feel like people connected to the message? Be more specific so that you can actually get valuable feedback.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, we can talk about leadership presence all day. We really can. And one big thing is that this is an entire module in Strategic Leader, right? Like we dive deep after you finish boot camp, right? Like we dive deep in the next level around leadership presence and how to build that. In Strategic Leader, you're able to learn about it, but then also practice and reflect and practice and reflect, which is all about what we do at Catalyst.
Yes, because so many people are talking about like, well, how do I move from this role to another role? How do I move to lead in this team? How do I move up and get promoted? Well, the reality is part of that is related to leadership presence. And so in strategic, after you have foundational leadership that you get in technical leader boot camp, then we start walking through this next layer of leadership skills that include this leadership presence for you to then start moving in those other spaces.
Absolutely. So if you've been through boot camp, join us for our Strategic Leader cohort this fall. If you have not been through boot camp, we also have a boot camp cohort starting this fall as well. So you can start working on those foundations, right? Of building that credibility, right? Knowing who you are as a leader. That is so important. And one of the things that we cover in boot camp.
Absolutely. You don't have to do it alone.
No.
Like stepping into being the leader that you want to be, that is what we do.
Absolutely.
To help you.
So reach out. We're happy to share information on that.
Yep. Or check out our webpage or our LinkedIn page. You will certainly not miss it.
You will not.
Yes. Okay. Well, we've done a lot of talking about leadership presence. And next week, we have two amazing leaders that are joining us, Katie Becker and Melody Thompson of the Vinci Group. We're going to talk about the things kind of in the space of like what we can do versus what we should do or the right things to do.
Yes. And I love this conversation, or I'm looking forward to this conversation, because it's like those nuances. Like what should we do? What's the right thing to do? Like what can we do and what's the right thing to do? And I think that that's something that as food safety people, right? Like we get into that space of, like technically we can release, but should we?
Are we out of compliance, or is it just a best practice, right? These things show up all the time.
Oh my, that is like perfect, right? So, right, is this best practice or is this, man, that's like bringing up some memories right there. And we're going to dive into it with Katie and Melody next week. So please join us next Wednesday, noon Eastern time, 11 Central time. That's what we do. We dive deep into these topics on Real Talk every single week.
Yes. And thank you so much for joining us this week. We appreciate it. Drop your comments in and we will get back to you.
Absolutely.
Until next week, make it a great week. Be the catalyst.
See you later.
Bye.